You're too old for me now.
Rowan Hale stood in the last row of the private chapel, unnoticed. He was not invited. He was not expected. Yet he came. The ceremony was small. No press, no industry elites, no flashing cameras, just close friends, family, and quiet certainty. At the end of the aisle stood Oliver Vance, calm, grounded, certain. The music shifted. Every head turned. Celeste Laurent appeared. Ivory silk, structured, elegant, effortless, not trying to look younger, not trying to compete. She walked with the confidence of a woman who had nothing to prove. Rowan's throat tightened. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. He pressed them together to stop it. 3 months ago, he told her she was too old for him. Now, as she moved forward step by steady step, he saw what he had dismissed. Not age, authority, depth, presence. Oliver's expression did not flicker. He looked at her as though she was the only strategic decision that mattered. Rowan felt something crack inside his chest. No one noticed him. No one needed to. For the first time in years, the youngest CEO in the room felt small, and he finally understood what he had thrown away. 3 months earlier, he said it without hesitation. "You're too old for me now." No anger, no raised voice, just calculation. He framed it as alignment, as optics, as growth. But here is the truth. He said she was too old. 3 months later, he couldn't stop crying. We'll get to that, but first, let me ask you something. Have you ever been discarded for something you cannot change? Your age, your past, your timing, your season of life. Have you ever watched someone trade loyalty for applause? Because that is what this story is about, not revenge, not jealousy, not even competition. It is about what happens when a person mistakes visibility for value. Rowan believed he was upgrading. He believed youth would strengthen his image. He believed perception would secure his legacy. He was wrong. Stay with me, because by the time this story reaches its turning point, an entire industry will witness the cost of confusing image with substance, and Rowan will learn that some losses do not return. There is a quiet pressure in powerful circles. You are expected to look successful, to sound progressive, to appear aligned with whatever the future is selling. Sometimes that pressure seeps into relationships. You start asking questions that have nothing to do with love. How does this look? Does this help my brand? Will this elevate my image? Rowan did not wake up one morning and decide to become shallow. It happened gradually. Headlines praising him, panels filled with younger founders, investors obsessed with trends and youth culture. Applause became addictive, and when applause becomes addictive, stability can start to feel ordinary. Celeste represented experience, measured thinking, long-term strategy, but Rowan began craving something louder, something that reflected speed instead of substance. Let me ask you directly, if someone chooses you in private but questions you in public, is that love? If someone values perception over partnership, what are you really building together? This is where ego steps in quietly, not with shouting, with justification, and justification can destroy what admiration once built. So here's the question. When someone tells you that you no longer fit their future, do you fight to prove your worth? Or do you walk away and let time reveal the truth? Celeste chose silence, not because she was weak, because she understood something Rowan did not. You never argue for your value in rooms where your presence was once celebrated. Rowan believed he was making a strategic decision. He convinced himself it was necessary. He spoke about momentum, about positioning, about alignment with where the market was headed. He thought he was thinking ahead. He had no idea he was standing at the edge of his own regret. Stay with me, because what unfolded after that private rejection reshaped boardrooms, relationships, and reputations. And before this story ends, you will see a man who once measured everything in projections realize that some losses cannot be negotiated. But to understand the collapse, we have to go back to when she was the one holding his company together. Before we rewind 5 years, I want you to think about something. Dignity is quiet. It does not beg. It does not compete. It does not lower itself to be chosen. If you believe that self-worth should never depend on someone else's insecurity, I want you to do two things. First, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales with Mr. Easton so you never miss stories that challenge ego and elevate wisdom. Second, comment below. Would you ever take someone back after they told you that you were too old for them? I read your thoughts. I value your perspective, and your voice matters in conversations like this. Now let's rewind. Because 5 years earlier, Rowan Hale was not standing in the back of a wedding chapel. He was standing on the edge of collapse. His company was bleeding capital. Investors were losing confidence. Headlines were turning skeptical. And the woman he would later discard for optics? She was the one they called to save him. 5 years earlier, Celeste Laurent walked into his boardroom for the first time, and everything began there. At 42, Celeste Laurent did not walk into rooms hoping to be noticed. She walked in expecting to be heard. Her consulting firm had rebuilt companies twice her size. She specialized in corporate recovery, high-risk restructuring, and executive recalibration. When investors sensed decline, they called her before they called public relations. She was precise, prepared, unemotional in negotiations. Her presence carried authority without volume. In boardrooms, she did not dominate conversations. She studied them. She let executives expose their blind spots through overconfidence. Then she spoke, slowly, clearly, with numbers that left little room for debate. She dressed sharply. Structured blazers, neutral tones, no need for excess. Her credibility spoke before she did. There were no scandals attached to her name, no flashy interviews, no self-promotion campaigns. Her reputation grew through results. Failure rates dropped under her oversight. Share prices stabilized. Leadership teams adjusted or exited. She believed in discipline over hype. Colleagues described her as steady. Clients described her as transformative. Competitors described her as dangerous in negotiation. What few understood was that Celeste did not view her work as conquest. She viewed it as correction. She respected power, but only when it was sustainable. And that was why she was brought in when Hale Technologies began collapsing under rapid expansion. At the time, she had no idea the CEO she was about to confront would change the trajectory of her personal life. She only knew one thing. The company was bleeding capital, and she intended to stop it. At 36, Rowan Hale was already a headline. Youngest CEO in his sector, visionary founder, media favorite. He had built Hale Technologies from a small innovation lab into a high-growth firm in under 6 years. Venture capital flowed toward him easily. Interviews followed every funding round. Podcasts praised his foresight. He was articulate, charismatic, quick with strategy, but growth had outpaced structure. Expansion into 3 new markets drained liquidity. Overhiring inflated operational costs. Product launches overlapped without long-term stabilization plans. Internally, departments operated in competition rather than coordination. Rowan thrived in acceleration. He struggled in consolidation. Board members began asking harder questions. Investors wanted clearer projections. Confidence remained in him personally, but confidence in the company wavered. He believed he could fix it himself. That belief was part strength, part liability. When Celeste's firm was retained, Rowan agreed reluctantly. He did not like external oversight. He saw consultants as cautious, conservative, slower than he preferred. He expected resistance from her. He did not expect precision. When he first reviewed her preliminary report, his jaw tightened. She had identified vulnerabilities he thought were minor. She highlighted cash flow gaps he dismissed as temporary. She questioned leadership structures he had personally approved. He admired bold thinking. He did not enjoy being dissected. Still, he agreed to the meeting. He told his board he would handle it. He assumed he would dominate the conversation. He had no idea he was about to meet someone who understood power differently than he did. And for the first time in years, he would feel intellectually challenged. Their first meeting took place in Hale Technologies' main boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Screens lined the walls, projecting performance dashboards and market forecasts. Senior executives filled the seats along the table, tense but silent. Rowan stood at the head. Celeste entered without theatrics. No small talk, no performative warmth. She placed her She placed her portfolio on the table, opened her tablet, and began. Your expansion into the European market was premature, she said calmly. You scaled marketing before stabilizing operational cost. Rowan leaned back in his chair. We secured early adoption. Speed matters in tech. Speed without retention becomes expense, she replied. Your churn rate increased 12% in 6 months. A quiet shift passed through the room. Rowan challenged her assumptions. She countered with data. He defended staffing decisions. She showed redundancy patterns. He argued long-term innovation. She questioned short-term liquidity. It was not hostile. It was sharp. Neither of them raised their voice, but neither retreated. The executives watched carefully. They were accustomed to Rowan leading every exchange. They were not accustomed to someone matching him point for point. At one moment, Rowan paused. He studied her. You came prepared, he said evenly. I don't attend meetings casually, she replied. A few executives exchanged glances. For the first time, Rowan did not feel superior in the room. He felt measured. And strangely, he respected it. The meeting extended 2 hours beyond schedule. By the end, he had not conceded publicly. But privately, he knew something. She saw angles he had ignored. And he was not used to being seen so clearly. The restructuring process demanded long hours. What began as formal boardroom sessions evolved into smaller strategy meetings. Fewer executives, more candor. By the third week, it was just the two of them most evenings. Spreadsheets glowed across dual monitors. Financial models updated in real time. Coffee cups accumulated near the edge of the desk. Outside the windows, the city lights flickered against the glass. Rowan began asking questions that extended beyond projections. How did you know this would fail? He asked one night, reviewing a failed product launch forecast. I've seen patterns repeat, Celeste replied. Founders fall in love with expansion before systems are ready. He gave a short smile. You don't romanticize growth. I respect sustainability. The air shifted. There was less resistance now, less need to defend. He found himself listening longer before interrupting. She noticed the adjustment, but did not comment on it. One evening, after hours of recalculating debt timelines, Rowan leaned back in his chair and studied her more closely than before. You don't seem impressed by any of this, he said quietly, gesturing toward the skyline, the office, the company he built. I'm impressed by discipline, she answered. Not spectacle. Silence settled between them. It was not awkward. It was aware. Then he asked the question that neither of them expected. Do you ever let anyone take care of you? She looked up slowly. That was not a strategic inquiry. That was personal. For the first time since she walked into his boardroom, the tension between them was no longer about balance sheets. It was about something else, and that shift would change everything. Their relationship did not begin with spectacle. There were no dramatic confessions in crowded restaurants, no public declarations on social media, no strategic leaks to business outlets. It began quietly. After the late-night strategy sessions tapered into lighter conversations, Rowan invited her to dinner. Not a trendy launch event, not a founder's mixer, a small restaurant tucked away from the financial district. They spoke about more than balance sheets. He told her about the early days of Hale Technologies, the nights he slept in the office, the fear he never admitted to investors, the pressure of being labeled a prodigy before turning 35. She told him about her first failed client, the embarrassment of misjudging a leadership team, the lessons that taught her caution. There was no performance between them. In public, Rowan commanded rooms. With her, he asked questions and waited for answers. Celeste did not alter herself to match his energy. She did not compete for attention. She did not try to appear younger, trendier, or more visible. She was steady, and Rowan found himself drawn to that steadiness. They kept the relationship private for months. Within the company, she remained the external consultant. At events, they arrived separately. They understood the scrutiny that would follow if their connection became visible too soon. That discretion strengthened the bond. They were choosing each other without an audience. Evenings became routine. Shared meals, thoughtful debate, laughter that was not rehearsed. Rowan once admitted, "You don't need me." She met his gaze calmly. "I choose you." That difference mattered. He had dated before. Models, influencers, women who admired his momentum. Celeste did not admire his momentum. She challenged it. And that challenge made him sharper. For the first time since founding his company, Rowan felt anchored instead of chased. It did not feel dramatic. It felt stable. And stability in that season felt like love. Their Sundays became sacred. No assistants, no board calls, no pitch decks. Rowan would arrive at her apartment around 9 in the morning, usually with coffee from the same quiet cafe downstairs. He stopped trying to impress her with grand gestures. She preferred consistency. They would sit at her dining table, laptops open but barely touched. Sunlight filtered through wide windows. The city moved outside, but inside, time slowed. They talked about strategy sometimes, but more often about perspective. "What would you do if you weren't a CEO?" she asked once. He thought for a moment. "I don't know who I'd be without building something." "You're more than your valuation," she said. He watched her carefully. "You believe that?" "I practice that." Those conversations softened him. In public, Rowan thrived on momentum. With Celeste, he learned to pause. He learned to sit in silence without filling it. There were evenings when he stayed over, and mornings when they cooked breakfast together. Nothing extravagant. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit, shared space. He once reached for her hand across the counter and held it longer than usual. "You calm me," he admitted. "You don't need calming," she replied gently. "You need clarity." She listened when he doubted himself. She questioned him when he overstretched. She did not flatter him to maintain access, and he began to rely on that honesty. They built rituals, quarterly goal reviews over wine, walks through the financial district at night after long days, planning future travel they rarely scheduled but enjoyed imagining. There was intimacy in the predictability. He told her things he did not tell his executive team. His fear of losing relevance, his anxiety about competition, his exhaustion from maintaining a public persona. With her, he removed the performance. For 3 years, that rhythm held. And Rowan often said, without irony, "Your maturity grounds me." At the time, he believed it. Rowan did not fall in love with Celeste because she flattered him. He fell in love with her because she steadied him. In rooms filled with ambition and noise, she was deliberate. When executives rushed toward expansion, she asked about infrastructure. When founders boasted about disruption, she questioned sustainability. Rowan admired that restraint. "You think 10 years ahead," he told her during one late drive back from the office. "Most people think about the next quarter." "I've seen what happens when leaders chase applause," she replied. "It fades faster than they expect." He laughed softly. "You don't chase applause. I build outcomes." He repeated that line in his head long after she said it. At industry dinners, she never tried to dominate conversations. She listened carefully, then offered concise insight that shifted the tone of the table. Investors noticed. Executives leaned in. Rowan felt proud standing beside her. Not because she made him look important, because she was important. There were moments when he watched her speak with his leadership team, explaining cost realignment or strategic downsizing, and he felt something close to awe. She did not seek validation. She commanded respect. One evening, after she successfully negotiated a difficult restructuring clause with a skeptical board member, Rowan pulled her aside. "You make me sharper," he admitted. "That's the goal," she said simply. He admired her composure, her discipline, her ability to separate emotion from execution. He often said he loved her maturity. He praised her experience. He described her as grounded. At the time, those compliments were sincere. But admiration is easy when it supports your image. The test comes when admiration begins to challenge your identity, and slowly, without announcing itself, the industry around Rowan began changing. Younger founders gained attention. Faster startups attracted headlines. Social presence started to influence valuation conversations. Rowan watched the shift. And though he still admired Celeste's maturity, something inside him began measuring perception. That shift was subtle. At first, the change did not arrive loudly. It slipped in through invitations. Rowan began receiving more requests for keynote appearances, founder spotlights, magazine features celebrating innovation under 40, panels filled with fast-talking entrepreneurs barely out of graduate school. At first, he declined most of them. Then he started accepting. Visibility matters, he told Celeste one evening, while adjusting his cufflinks before an event. If we're not seen, we're forgotten. She studied him. Seen by who? Investors, media, talent. She did not argue. She simply observed. At conferences, he stayed longer than necessary. He lingered after panels to exchange cards with emerging founders. He reposted clips of himself speaking about disruption and speed. The language around him shifted. Acceleration, youth-driven innovation, cultural relevance. He began referencing trends more often in meetings. He talked about optics in ways he never had before. Perception influences valuation, he said during a strategy call. That depends on performance, Celeste replied. He smiled, but his tone sharpened slightly. Performance needs narrative. It was small, but it was new. At social gatherings, he introduced her differently. This is Celeste. She's helped us restructure, he would say. Instead of this is Celeste, my partner. She noticed. She did not confront him immediately. She watched. There were moments when he compared Hale Technologies to newer startups gaining viral attention. He critiqued their recklessness, yet he monitored their follower counts. He admired depth. But he was beginning to crave relevance. One evening, an email arrived. An exclusive tech founders summit in Silicon Valley. Private investors, media access, emerging executives. Rowan's eyes lit up as he read it. This is important, he said. The future of the industry will be there. Celeste looked at the invitation carefully. Then go, she said calmly. He paused. You'll come with me, he replied. Neither of them knew that this summit would not strengthen their bond. It would test it. The Silicon Valley Summit was curated, not advertised. Attendance required nomination. Panels were private. Conversations carried influence that rarely reached public feeds. Venture capital partners moved through the venue with quiet authority. Founders compared growth metrics in low voices over polished glass tables. The atmosphere was controlled but competitive. Energy pulsed beneath every handshake. Most of the executives were young, late 20s, early 30s, confident in ways that bordered on dismissive. They spoke about disruption as if longevity were optional. Speed was celebrated. Caution was questioned. Celeste felt the shift immediately. She stood beside Rowan during the opening reception, observing rather than inserting herself. She listened to conversations about scaling at any cost, about branding before profitability, about cultural dominance over operational stability. Rowan fit easily into the rhythm. He laughed more than usual. His posture loosened. His tone sharpened with competitive edge. You're still ahead of the curve, one founder told him. Rowan nodded, modest but pleased. We're evolving. Celeste noticed how often that word surfaced. Evolving, adapting, staying relevant. The room rewarded visibility. Attendees were praised not only for revenue, but for social traction. Investor discussions referenced engagement numbers alongside quarterly performance. Optics were currency here, and Rowan was fluent. Throughout the evening, he moved from cluster to cluster, exchanging cards, scheduling follow-ups, accepting invitations for podcast interviews. Celeste remained poised, but something felt unfamiliar. Not insecurity, distance. The industry had always been ambitious, but here, youth itself seemed positioned as advantage. And for the first time since their relationship began, Celeste sensed Rowan absorbing that atmosphere more deeply than strategy required. He was not just attending the summit. He was measuring himself against it. Brielle Carter arrived late to the second evening reception. She worked in Hale Technologies' marketing division. 27. Sharp, socially fluid. Known internally for aggressive branding campaigns that increased online engagement. Rowan spotted her almost immediately. Brielle, he called, stepping forward with visible enthusiasm. Glad you made it. She smiled brightly. Wouldn't miss this. Celeste watched the exchange carefully. Brielle carried herself with ease in the summit environment. She referenced trending founders by first name. She spoke fluently about digital reach, cultural positioning, audience growth metrics. Within minutes, Rowan began introducing her repeatedly. This is Brielle. She's leading our brand transformation, he told one investor. To stay ahead, You need voices like hers, he added to another. Celeste stood beside them, composed. Rowan did not exclude her. But his emphasis shifted. Marketing is where the future is headed, he said during a discussion about company trajectory. The next generation understands visibility differently. Brielle laughed at his comments before he finished them. She nodded at his projections, reinforced his language, amplified his points. The synergy looked modern, energetic, forward-facing. Celeste felt the nuance. Rowan's tone when introducing Brielle carried pride that felt strategic. His tone when introducing Celeste was respectful, but quieter. "This is Celeste," he said at one point. "She helped us restructure." Helped. Past tense. Brielle leaned in during conversations, touched Rowan's arm lightly when emphasizing agreement, maintained eye contact with investors as if already positioning herself as the company's cultural bridge. Rowan responded to that energy. He straightened slightly, spoke faster, used phrases about innovation cycles and market momentum that he had not leaned on heavily before. Celeste did not react outwardly. She observed. This was not flirtation. It was alignment performance. And the summit rewarded that performance. The moment did not arrive with spectacle. It came during a small investor circle near the edge of the reception hall. 5 people. 5 people. 2 venture capital partners. 1 rising founder. Rowan. Brielle. Celeste stood slightly behind, listening. The discussion centered on market positioning over the next decade. One investor asked Rowan how Hale Technologies planned to stay culturally relevant as newer startups gain traction. Rowan answered smoothly. "We're evolving our public narrative," he said. "Leadership isn't just about product anymore. It's about alignment with where the industry is headed." He gestured toward Brielle. "This is where the future is headed." The investor nodded approvingly. "You're smart to integrate younger leadership into visibility strategy." Rowan smiled. Celeste did not move. The word settled heavily. Future. Not in a strategic document, not in a forecast, in reference to a person, and more importantly, in contrast to something unspoken. She met Rowan's eyes briefly. He did not look away. He did not clarify. The conversation continued, but Celeste heard it differently now. Every mention of relevance felt layered. Every compliment about youthful insight felt pointed. Later, when Brielle excused herself to join another group, Rowan remained animated. "Did you hear that?" he asked Celeste quietly. "They're looking for energy shifts. Cultural reinvention." She studied him. "Energy shifts," she repeated evenly. He did not detect the weight in her tone. "I need to be positioned correctly," he continued. "The market rewards adaptability." Celeste nodded once. She understood adaptability. She also understood insecurity masked as strategy. For the first time since their relationship began, she felt something tighten beneath her calm exterior. Not jealousy. Awareness. Something fundamental was being recalibrated, and she was no longer certain she was included in the new equation. The hotel suite was quiet when they returned. The city stretched beyond the glass windows, glowing against the night sky. Inside, the silence felt measured. Rowan loosened his tie and set his phone on the console table. Notifications continued to flash across the screen. Messages from investors, invitations to after-parties, interview requests. Celeste removed her heels slowly and placed them near the door. Neither of them spoke at first. "You felt it too," Rowan said finally. She turned toward him. "Felt what?" "The gap," he replied. "The industry is shifting. Investors are watching more than numbers." She waited. "Be clear," she said. He exhaled, pacing once before facing her fully. "Image matters, alignment matters, optics influence valuation, and—" she prompted calmly. He hesitated only a second. "You're too old for me now." The sentence did not echo. It landed. There was no shouting, no trembling voice, no anger, just precision. Celeste absorbed the words without visible reaction. "You knew my age when you pursued me," she said evenly. "I did," Rowan replied. "But things evolve. Evolve. As if love were a market cycle." He began speaking about energy, about how founders were pairing themselves with people who reflected momentum, about how perception shaped influence. He framed it as strategic awareness. He framed it as necessary growth. He did not frame it as fear. Celeste studied him carefully. For 3 years, he praised her maturity. Tonight, he treated it as liability. She did not cry. She did not defend herself. "My age hasn't changed," she said quietly. "Your priorities have." He looked unsettled by the clarity of that statement. The room grew still. By morning, she was packing her suitcase. Neatly, deliberately, no drama, just dignity. And Rowan, watching from the doorway, did not yet understand that he had just severed something he would never replace. Celeste left before sunrise. No dramatic goodbye. No final argument in the hallway. No attempt to revisit what had already been spoken. She zipped her suitcase carefully, checked the drawers, and placed her room key on the desk. Rowan stood near the window, arms folded, watching her reflection in the glass rather than meeting her eyes. "You're not going to say anything?" he asked. "I've heard enough," she replied calmly. There was no tremor in her voice, no visible crack in her composure. That unsettled him more than tears would have. He had expected emotion, resistance, perhaps negotiation. Instead, he received clarity. She walked past him without hesitation. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt longer than usual. She did not check her phone. She did not replay the sentence in her head. She categorized it. Too old. Not because of love, not because of conflict, because of optics. At the airport, she booked the earliest flight home and opened her laptop before boarding. Work grounded her. Numbers did not insult her worth. By the time the plane took off, she had already outlined 3 client calls for the following week. She did not block Rowan's number. She simply stopped expecting it to mean anything. When she returned to her apartment, she placed her suitcase in the hallway and stood still for a moment. Silence. No shared Sunday plans. No scheduled dinners. No future travel conversations. Just quiet space. She did not cry immediately. She allowed herself one controlled exhale. Then she went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat down. Dignity did not require noise, and she refused to let a single sentence reduce years of discipline. It did not take long. Within weeks of the summit, photos began circulating. Rowan and Brielle seated side by side at a founders panel in San Francisco. Rowan speaking into a microphone while Brielle leaned in, smiling, attentive. Another image showed them at a private networking dinner, positioned close enough to imply partnership beyond strategy. No official announcement was made. There did not need to be one. Industry blogs picked up the visual cues. Hale Technologies embraces youth-driven rebrand. Next-gen leadership at the forefront. Headlines framed it as evolution, not replacement. Brielle's social media presence amplified the narrative. She posted behind-the-scenes shots from conferences, short clips of Rowan discussing innovation, captions about forward momentum and cultural relevance. Rowan reshared selectively. Celeste saw it all. Not obsessively, but enough to understand the direction. The language surrounding Rowan shifted noticeably. Articles highlighted his adaptability. Commentators praised his ability to stay connected to emerging voices. Investors described Hale Technologies as refreshed. The word refreshed appeared more than once. At a quarterly investor meeting broadcast online, Rowan spoke about brand realignment. "We're positioning ourselves for the future," he said confidently. "Our leadership reflects where innovation is heading." Brielle sat in the front row, visible in the camera frame. Celeste noticed something subtle. Rowan's tone carried excitement. Not about product development, about perception. The relationship between Rowan and Brielle remained undefined publicly, but their proximity grew consistent. Conferences, panels, industry retreats. It looked cohesive, modern, strategic. Some within the company questioned the speed of the shift, but the market responded positively. Engagement metrics climbed. Media invitations increased. From the outside, Rowan appeared ahead of the curve. Inside, something fundamental had changed. And Celeste understood that this was no longer about compatibility. It was about image management. The industry loves a storyline, and Rowan's transition fit perfectly into one. Tech publications framed him as a founder who refused to age out of relevance. Opinion pieces praised his willingness to surround himself with younger executives who understood digital culture instinctively. Hale reinvents leadership model, one headline read. Another described the pairing of Rowan and Brielle as a strategic fusion of experience and youth. The phrasing was deliberate. Experience and youth. Balanced. Progressive. Adaptive. No one referenced Celeste directly, but absence can speak loudly. Investors cited Hale Technologies as an example of evolution done right. Marketing podcasts invited Brielle to discuss branding for a new generation. She spoke confidently about storytelling, platform presence, and authenticity. Rowan joined her for several interviews. Their conversations sounded fluid, coordinated. When asked about maintaining relevance in a competitive field, Rowan said, "You have to understand the energy of where things are moving. Stagnation is risk." The comments circulated widely. Clips were reposted with captions celebrating forward thinking. Celeste watched from a distance, not as a partner, not as a critic, but as an observer. The narrative painted Rowan as bold. It painted Brielle as fresh. It painted Hale Technologies as aligned with the future. The public did not see the private cost of that alignment. They did not see the quiet hotel room. The sentence delivered with surgical calm. They saw momentum. Inside her own firm, Celeste continued meeting clients, leading restructuring projects, advising boards. Her work did not slow. But occasionally, during late evenings reviewing financial models, she would pause when another article appeared on her screen. Not from longing, from clarity. Rowan had chosen applause over depth, and the media was rewarding him for it. For now, the first week after the public shift, Celeste allowed herself one night of stillness. No spreadsheets, no client calls, no strategic planning. She sat in her living room with the lights dimmed and replayed the last 5 years in her mind, not to question her worth, not to rewrite conversations, but to assess. Assessment was her strength. She did not ask, "Why wasn't I enough?" She asked, "What did I overlook?" The answer was not age, it was ego. Rowan had not fallen out of love suddenly. He had drifted toward perception slowly. He wanted to be seen as aligned with a younger, faster narrative. And when narrative became priority, loyalty became negotiable. Celeste stood, walked to her desk, and opened a blank document. She titled it, "Non-Negotiables. Respect in Public and Private. Alignment without performance. Partnership without image management." She added one more line, "Never argue for a seat you already earned." The following morning, she returned to work sharper than before. She expanded her firm's portfolio into new sectors. She reconnected with past clients. She declined invitations that felt performative. She did not attempt to correct the media narrative. She focused on building her own. Pain, when handled with discipline, refines clarity. Let me pause here and ask you something directly. If someone chooses image over loyalty, do you fight to prove yourself? Or do you walk and let your absence speak? Comment below. Your answer says more about your standards than your emotions, because Celeste chose to walk. And 3 weeks after she finalized that decision internally, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name she had studied for years. Oliver Vance, Rowan Hale's most strategic competitor. And he was not calling to offer sympathy. He was calling with opportunity. Oliver Vance did not dominate headlines. He did not appear on weekly podcasts discussing disruption. He did not trend on business platforms for bold predictions. His company, Vance Systems, grew steadily without spectacle. In industry circles, he was described differently: measured, strategic, patient. Where Rowan accelerated, Oliver consolidated. Where Hale Technologies expanded into multiple markets quickly, Vance Systems entered one region at a time, securing operational depth before scaling. Investors trusted him because he underpromised and overdelivered. His quarterly calls were concise. His forecasts were conservative. His margins were disciplined. Celeste had followed his trajectory for years. She respected his method. They had never worked together directly, but their industries overlapped enough that she understood his position relative to Rowan. Competitor, not loud, not flashy, not desperate for cultural relevance. When his name appeared on her phone, she did not react emotionally. She reacted analytically. "Celeste Laurent speaking," she answered. "Oliver Vance," he said evenly. No hesitation, no preamble. "I believe we should meet." There was no reference to Rowan. No subtle comment about recent headlines. No suggestion that he was calling because of personal shifts. "I've reviewed your restructuring work," he continued. "I need that level of precision." His tone was calm, direct, not opportunistic, strategic. Celeste leaned back in her chair. "What specifically are you addressing?" she asked. "A leadership bottleneck and an acquisition window," he replied. "I prefer correction before exposure." That answer told her enough. He was not seeking advantage through gossip. He was seeking advantage through competence. They scheduled a meeting for the following week. After ending the call, Celeste sat quietly for a moment. This was not revenge. It was alignment. And Oliver Vance was not calling to capitalize on her past. He was calling because he recognized her value. Oliver chose a neutral location, not his headquarters, not her office, a private executive conference suite overlooking the river, reserved under his firm's name, but absent of branding displays. When Celeste entered, Oliver was already seated at the long table, reviewing a printed briefing document. He stood immediately. No exaggerated smile, no charm offensive. "Thank you for coming," he said. His handshake was firm, steady, unhurried. She noted the details. No press lingering outside. No assistants hovering inside the room. Just two professionals and a stack of strategic data. He began without small talk. "Vance Systems is preparing to acquire a smaller analytics firm," he explained. "The numbers are strong, but internal leadership alignment is weaker than projected." He slid a financial breakdown toward her. "I do not expand unless the foundation is reinforced." The statement contrasted sharply with Rowan's former urgency. Celeste reviewed the documents carefully. Revenue streams were consistent. Debt exposure was controlled. But she quickly identified what Oliver hinted at. "Your senior vice president is consolidating too much authority," she said. Oliver nodded once. Agreed. He did not defend the executive. He did not soften the critique. He listened. "Your growth rate is stable," she continued. "But you're vulnerable to internal bottleneck during acquisition integration. That's why you're here," he replied. The meeting extended for nearly 3 hours. No raised voices, no ego contests. Oliver asked specific questions about leadership recalibration, about restructuring frameworks, about cultural integration post-acquisition. He did not ask about Rowan. He did not reference headlines. Celeste appreciated that restraint. When she finished outlining her initial recommendations, he closed his folder. "I prefer long-term correction over short-term headlines," he said. "Can you deliver that?" "Yes," she answered. There was no performance in the exchange, just clarity. When she left the conference suite, she recognized something subtle. This meeting did not feel charged. It felt stable. And stability, after recent months, carried weight. The second meeting took place at Oliver's headquarters. Unlike Hale Technologies, which showcased innovation through open glass offices and digital displays, Vance Systems felt structured. Private offices, deliberate pacing, minimal noise. Oliver walked Celeste through each department before their strategy session began. "Observe before you advise," he said. She appreciated that. In the executive boardroom, he introduced her simply. "This is Celeste Laurent. She'll be reviewing our integration framework. No embellishment, no past tense references, no positioning language, just present authority." During the discussion, Celeste outlined her assessment of leadership redundancy. She recommended redistributing operational oversight to prevent concentration of power within one executive. Oliver did not interrupt. He took notes. When one of his directors challenged her suggestion, arguing that the current structure ensured speed, Oliver turned toward Celeste. "Explain the risk again," he said. She did, this time with greater detail. Market volatility, decision bottlenecks, internal competition under acquisition pressure. When she finished, Oliver addressed the director calmly. "We build resilience, not urgency," he said. The conversation shifted immediately. He did not protect ego. He protected structure. Later, in a smaller session, Celeste proposed a phased integration plan instead of an immediate merger announcement. "Visibility can wait," she said. "Stability cannot." Oliver considered her words carefully. "Draft the framework," he replied. "I'll support it." There was no tension in deferring to her expertise, no subtle competition for dominance. He asked for her perspective repeatedly throughout the afternoon. Not to test her, to understand her reasoning. After years of defending her insight in rooms filled with louder personalities, Celeste noticed the difference. Here, she did not have to assert authority. It was acknowledged, and that acknowledgement created something unfamiliar. Ease. The acquisition closed 6 weeks later. No grand announcement, no media spectacle, a concise press release outlining strategic integration and long-term positioning. Internally, the transition unfolded with precision. Oliver followed the phased framework Celeste designed. Authority was redistributed. Departments were recalibrated. Communication channels were clarified before public visibility increased. The result was smooth, predictable, stable. After the final executive review meeting, most of the team filtered out of the boardroom, relieved and satisfied. Celeste gathered her documents, preparing to leave. "You're not in a rush, are you?" Oliver asked. She paused. "Not particularly." He nodded toward the elevator. "Walk with me." They exited the building and stepped onto the sidewalk. The river stretched quietly alongside the headquarters, reflecting late afternoon light. There were no assistants trailing behind them. No photographers, no curated narrative. Just two professionals walking at an even pace. "You could have leveraged my position against Hale," Oliver said evenly. "You didn't." "I don't negotiate from emotion," Celeste replied. He studied her profile briefly before looking forward again. "That discipline is rare." She gave a small smile. "It's practiced." They walked in silence for several moments. There was no tension in the quiet, no expectation, just shared air. "You don't compete for attention," he observed. "I don't need it," she answered. He nodded once, as if confirming something internally. When they reached the end of the path, he stopped. "I value partnership," he said. "Professional first." The emphasis was deliberate. Respect without performance. There was no urgency in his tone. No strategic flirtation, only steadiness. As they turned back toward the building, Celeste felt something subtle shift inside her. Not excitement. Safety. And she did not yet realize that this quiet river walk would become the foundation of something neither of them planned. Celeste's engagement with Vance Systems did not end after the acquisition. Oliver retained her firm on a longer advisory contract. Not for crisis correction, for strategic refinement. They met twice a week at first, then 3 times when expansion planning intensified. Unlike her time at Hale Technologies, these sessions were not charged with urgency. They were intentional. Oliver brought forward questions before problems surfaced. "How does this affect 5-year positioning?" he would ask. "Where are we exposed culturally? What are we overlooking?" Celeste appreciated the preventative mindset. Together, they mapped out long-term growth corridors, sustainable hiring patterns, leadership development pipelines designed to prevent overconcentration of authority. Their conversations expanded beyond numbers. Oliver would sometimes pause mid-meeting and say, "Let's slow that down. Walk me through your reasoning." Not because he doubted her, because he valued the architecture of her thinking. In executive briefings, he credited her openly. "This framework came from Celeste's analysis," he would say, without hesitation. The acknowledgement was consistent, not performative. As weeks passed, the rhythm between them settled naturally. They anticipated each other's thought patterns, completed strategic projections in sync, identified risk simultaneously without verbal cue. One afternoon, during a long planning session, Oliver leaned back and studied the whiteboard filled with structural revisions. "You think in layers," he said. "I think in consequences," she replied. He smiled faintly. "That's rarer." There was no flirtation in the statement, just recognition. For the first time in years, Celeste found herself collaborating without bracing. She did not have to defend maturity. She did not have to soften clarity. The work flowed. And somewhere between acquisition audits and quarterly forecasts, collaboration began to feel less like consultancy and more like alignment. Trust did not arrive dramatically. It built through consistency. Oliver followed through on every structural adjustment they agreed upon. When resistance surfaced within his executive team, he addressed it directly instead of allowing it to simmer. Celeste noticed. He did not use her strategy as cover. He stood behind it. One evening, after a long day reviewing leadership evaluations, Oliver asked if she had eaten. "Not yet," she admitted. "There's a place nearby," he said. "Quiet." They walked there, without agenda. The restaurant was understated. No industry crowd. No networking pressure. Over dinner, the conversation shifted. He asked about her early career, the risks she took when launching her firm, the failures that shaped her caution. She answered honestly. In return, he spoke about the weight of being second in a competitive industry, how every growth move was compared to hail technologies, how patience was often mistaken for weakness. "I prefer steady wins," he said. "But the market rewards spectacle." "Only temporarily," she replied. He held her gaze a moment longer than usual. "I don't want temporary." There was no urgency in his voice, just certainty. In the weeks that followed, their meetings extended beyond office hours occasionally. Not frequently, not impulsively, deliberately. He never pressed for personal details she did not volunteer. He never referenced Rowan unless it was strategically necessary. And when he did, it was without emotion. Celeste began to relax in ways she had not anticipated. She did not feel evaluated. She felt valued. One evening, as they reviewed long-term projections in his office, Oliver said quietly, "You don't have to prove anything here." The statement landed differently than similar words from her past. It did not carry admiration. It carried acceptance. And trust, once formed, does not rush. It settles. The shift from professional alignment to personal awareness happened quietly. It was not planned. After securing a major cross-border partnership that strengthened Vance Systems' international position, Oliver suggested they step out of the office for air. The evening was cool. The city lights reflected across the river beside the headquarters. They walked without agenda, shoulders nearly aligned, neither rushing the silence. "That deal would have collapsed under a different structure," Oliver said calmly. "It would have overextended your liquidity," Celeste replied. "You prevented that by waiting." He glanced at her briefly. "We prevented it." The correction was subtle. She did not comment, but she noticed. They reached the midpoint of the river path and slowed. There was no tension in the quiet space between them. No need to fill it with commentary about markets or competitors. Oliver stopped walking first. "You approach pressure differently," he said. "You don't react. You evaluate." "It saves energy," she answered. "It builds confidence," he corrected gently. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, without spectacle or hesitation, Oliver reached for her hand. Not abruptly, not possessively, steady. His fingers intertwined with hers, as if the decision had already been weighed and measured. Celeste felt the contact before she processed it. There was no rush of surprise, no need to pull away. Just warmth. "I value partnership," he said quietly. "In business, in life." The statement was not framed as a declaration. It was framed as intention. She tightened her grip slightly in response. The gesture was small, but it carried more certainty than dramatic confessions ever could. They resumed walking, hand in hand, neither accelerating nor retreating. For the first time since the summit in Silicon Valley, Celeste did not feel the need to assess risk. She felt aligned. And alignment, when mutual, does not require performance. The proposal did not happen in a ballroom. There were no staged lights, no photographers waiting outside, no orchestrated reveal designed for headlines. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Celeste stood in Oliver's kitchen, sleeves rolled up, slicing vegetables while he handled the stove. The air carried the scent of garlic and rosemary. Soft music played from a speaker on the counter. It was ordinary, and that was the point. They moved around each other easily, passing plates, sharing small smiles, no need for constant conversation. After dinner, they remained at the table, glasses of wine half full. Oliver studied her for a moment before speaking. "When you walked into my office months ago," he began evenly, "I saw discipline." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's not romantic." He smiled faintly. "It's foundational." He stood, walked toward the counter, and returned holding a small box. No dramatic kneeling, no public spectacle, just intention. "I don't want youth," he said steadily. "I want partnership. I want wisdom beside me. I want someone who thinks beyond applause. I want you. There was no urgency in his voice, no insecurity driving the request, just certainty. Celeste felt the weight of the moment without pressure. He was not choosing her for optics. He was choosing her for alignment. You understand what you're asking, she said softly. I do, he replied. And I don't make decisions lightly. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Yes. The word carried no hesitation. Oliver slipped the ring onto her finger, not as a display, but as confirmation. They did not post about it that night. They did not call media outlets. They finished their wine. 3 days later, the engagement became public. And across the industry, phones began ringing, including Rowan's. The announcement was simple. A joint statement released through Vance Systems' corporate channel. Oliver Vance and Celeste Laurent are pleased to share their engagement. Their professional collaboration has grown into a personal partnership, rooted in shared values and long-term vision. No embellishment, no dramatic language. But the industry did not treat it quietly. Within hours, tech publications reframed the narrative. Vance and Laurent, a strategic and personal alliance. Former Hale consultant engaged to chief competitor. Power shift in the executive landscape. Commentators revisited Celeste's restructuring work at Hale Technologies. Some speculated about insider knowledge. Others praised Oliver's decisiveness. Social feeds accelerated the conversation. Investors debated implications. Analysts questioned how this alignment might influence future market positioning. Even lifestyle publications highlighted the pairing as an example of mature executive partnership. The word mature appeared repeatedly, not as liability, as strength. Photos surfaced from a small gathering where close friends celebrated the engagement. No staged glamour, just genuine smiles and steady composure. Celeste did not engage publicly beyond the official statement. Oliver remained consistent in tone. This is personal, he said during a brief press inquiry. Our professional decisions remain grounded in performance. The distinction was clear. Meanwhile, industry observers began contrasting Vance Systems' disciplined growth with Hale Technologies' increasing visibility-driven strategy. The engagement did not cause that comparison. It amplified it. And across offices, private conversations began reshaping old assumptions. The woman once dismissed as misaligned with the future was now aligned with its most disciplined competitor. Headlines move quickly, but their implications linger. Inside Hale Technologies, the engagement announcement did not go unnoticed. It was not discussed openly at first, but in executive meetings, the air shifted. During a quarterly review, one board member cleared his throat before referencing Vance Systems' recent acquisition performance. Impressive integration timeline, he remarked casually. Rowan nodded once. They've been conservative. Another director added. Laurent advised that integration, correct? A brief pause followed. Yes, Rowan replied evenly. She did. No one pushed further. But the subtext remained. In smaller breakout sessions, senior managers speculated quietly. Not about romance, about strategy. Do you think Vance Systems gains insight into Hale's old vulnerabilities? One asked. They would have needed that regardless, another replied. Her discipline strengthened us too. The conversation was careful, measured, but comparison had entered the room. Meanwhile, Brielle sensed the undercurrent. During a marketing planning session, she emphasized digital expansion metrics more aggressively than usual, highlighted engagement growth, reiterated Hale's relevance among younger founders. The board listened, but their questions drifted toward profitability stability, optics versus structure. Rowan felt the tension, not hostile, evaluative. Investors began requesting clearer margin forecasts rather than cultural impact reports. Conference invitations continued, but the board's internal focus sharpened. In one private meeting, a senior advisor said quietly, "Momentum must translate into durable numbers." Rowan agreed outwardly. Internally, something tightened. For the first time since the summit, the narrative around him felt less celebratory. Not collapsing, but scrutinized. And he could not ignore the timing. Celeste's engagement had not weakened him directly, but it had repositioned her. And in doing so, it shifted perception in rooms that mattered. Whispers do not require volume. They require context. And context was changing. Rowan saw the engagement photo before anyone mentioned it to him. It appeared on his screen between investor emails and conference invitations. Celeste stood beside Oliver in a private setting, not on a stage. No microphones, no branded backdrop, just quiet confidence. She looked composed, certain, not triumphant, not performative, certain. Rowan leaned back in his chair and stared longer than necessary. 3 months earlier, he had framed her as misaligned with the future. Now she stood beside the one competitor consistently outperforming Hale Technologies in margin stability. He told himself it was coincidence. He told himself it was strategic overlap. But the narrative unsettled him. He began revisiting memories he had compartmentalized. Her steady voice in the boardroom, her measured caution during expansion debates, her warning about over-reliance on narrative over structure. At the time, he interpreted her restraint as limitation. Now, watching Oliver's disciplined rise, he reconsidered. Later that evening, Brielle spoke enthusiastically about an upcoming media feature. She outlined social metrics and digital campaign targets. Rowan nodded. But his attention drifted. He noticed something subtle in his own reflection. Fatigue. The performance of relevance required constant reinforcement. Celeste's image required none. He opened Vance Systems' latest quarterly report. Strong margins, stable expansion, predictable growth, no dramatic headlines, just results. Regret does not announce itself loudly. It begins as comparison, and comparison, when honest, can be uncomfortable. Rowan closed the report and stood near his office window. For the first time, he did not measure success in applause. He measured it in depth. And depth was something he had dismissed too quickly. Rowan did not call immediately. He drafted the message twice before deleting it. Pride resists vulnerability, but regret has a way of pressing through ego. 3 days after the engagement announcement, he finally sent a short email. Subject, conversation. Celeste, I'd appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. In person. Rowan. He kept it brief. No reference to the engagement. No acknowledgement of the past. No explanation. She replied 4 hours later. 30 minutes. Friday. 4 p.m. My office. The precision unsettled him. On Friday afternoon, Rowan arrived 10 minutes early. Celeste's office felt exactly as he remembered. Organized. Intentional. Controlled. She entered the conference room at precisely 4. No small talk. You asked to meet, she said evenly. Rowan studied her carefully. She looked unchanged. Not younger. Not older. Just assured. I didn't expect this, he admitted finally. Expect what? She asked. You. With him. She folded her hands calmly on the table. You made your decision months ago, she said. He exhaled slowly. My relationship with Brielle ended, he added. It lacked stability. The admission felt thin even as he spoke it. Celeste did not react. I made a mistake, he continued. Silence filled the room. Not tense. Final. Rowan realized something in that moment. He was not competing with Oliver. He was confronting his own choice. I would have married you, he said quietly. Her gaze remained steady. You had your chance. The words were not sharp. They were factual. And as he sat there, searching for leverage that no longer existed, he understood something deeply uncomfortable. This meeting would not restore what he lost. It would define it. Rowan had walked into hundreds of boardrooms without hesitation. He had negotiated hostile acquisitions, defended strategic pivots, closed multi-million-dollar deals under pressure. This felt different. As he sat across from Celeste in her conference room, confidence did not arrive on command. The glass walls reflected the late afternoon light. Her office remained exactly as he remembered. Structured shelves, clean desk, no clutter. She did not appear rushed. She did not appear emotional. She appeared composed. That unsettled him more than anger would have. You look well, he said. You look well, he said, aware of how insufficient it sounded. I am, she replied. No elaboration. He noticed the engagement ring on her hand immediately. Not oversized. Not designed for spectacle. Intentional. He swallowed. I didn't think things would move this quickly, he admitted. You mean, my life? She asked evenly. He hesitated. You and Oliver. Her expression did not shift. Rowan had expected defensiveness, perhaps subtle bitterness. Instead, he encountered neutrality. The imbalance in power felt unfamiliar. He was used to leading conversations. Now, he searched for footing. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "About what?" she asked. The question was not sharp. It was clinical. Rowan realized something quietly painful. She was not here to reconcile. She was here to conclude. And for the first time since the summit, uncertainty replaced ego. He leaned forward slightly. "This isn't how I thought it would end," he said. Celeste's response was simple. It didn't end accidentally. The room felt smaller, and Rowan understood that this conversation would not revolve around market shifts or perception. It would revolve around accountability. Rowan inhaled slowly before speaking again. "My relationship with Brielle ended," he said. The statement hung between them. Celeste did not ask why. He continued anyway. "It wasn't stable," he admitted. "There was chemistry, momentum, public alignment. But when the cameras weren't there, it felt thin." He chose the word carefully. Thin, as if depth were something measurable in hindsight. "We worked well on stage," he added. "In interviews, on panels. We understood how to present a unified message." Celeste listened without interruption. "But when decisions got difficult," he continued, "there was no foundation beneath it. No long-term thinking, no challenge." He paused. "I mistook energy for compatibility." The admission cost him something. Not reputation, ego. He had defended that relationship publicly, positioned it as evolution, as alignment with industry momentum. Now he was dissecting it. "Did you love her?" Celeste asked calmly. He hesitated. "I admired what she represented." "And what was that?" "Youth, relevance, cultural positioning." The words sounded smaller out loud. Celeste's gaze did not harden. It clarified. Rowan leaned back in his chair, running a hand across his jaw. "I convinced myself I needed that to stay ahead," he said quietly. "To look aligned with where things were moving." "And did it work?" she asked. "For a while. And now?" He looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "Now it feels hollow." There was no drama in the admission, just recognition. Rowan had built an image-driven narrative. It performed well, until it didn't. And now he sat across from the woman he once dismissed, realizing that the depth he abandoned could not be replicated through presentation. The silence after his confession lingered longer than he expected. Rowan had always been skilled with language. He could frame failure as strategy. He could rebrand setbacks as pivots. But this required something else. "I made a mistake," he said finally. Not framed as miscalculation, not softened as misunderstanding. A mistake. Celeste did not move. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. "I thought aligning myself with youth would strengthen my position," he continued. "I thought it would protect my relevance. And," she prompted, "and I undervalued what I already had." The words were deliberate. He was not just referring to a relationship. He was referring to substance. "You warned me about chasing narrative over structure," he admitted. "You told me performance fades." Her expression remained steady. "You didn't just lose a partner," he said more quietly. "You lost someone who believed in you." Celeste tilted her head slightly. "No," she corrected. "You lost someone who believed in discipline." That distinction stung. Rowan felt it. "I would have married you," he added, the sentence escaping before he could evaluate it. She did not flinch. "You had every opportunity," she replied. He exhaled slowly. "I thought I had time," he admitted. There it was. Assumption. He assumed she would remain available while he tested alignment elsewhere. Assumed maturity equaled patience without limit. Assumed loyalty would wait for ego to finish exploring. He had not anticipated consequence. "I didn't understand what I was giving up," he said. "That's clear," she answered calmly. For the first time in the conversation, Rowan's composure wavered. He had built companies from the ground up, but rebuilding trust required something he had not practiced: humility without negotiation, and he did not know how to ask for it. Rowan's voice had softened. The confidence that once carried him through investor rooms was no longer present. "I didn't understand what I was giving up," he repeated quietly. Celeste studied him for a long moment. This was the same man who once stood in a hotel suite and spoke with precision. The same man who calculated alignment and optics as if love were a quarterly metric. Now he looked uncertain, not defeated, but aware. "You didn't lose me because of age," she said calmly. He looked up. "You lost me because you valued applause." The sentence did not rise in volume. It did not carry accusation. It carried truth. Rowan inhaled sharply, as if something inside him had been named too clearly. "You valued how things looked more than how they were built," she continued. "You confused relevance with depth." He tried to speak, but she did not rush to fill the space. "My age didn't change," she added. "Your priorities did." The room felt still, not tense, final. Rowan leaned back slowly. He realized something that had not fully formed before. He had not replaced Celeste. He had replaced discipline with display. And display does not sustain. "Is there anything I can say?" he asked quietly. Celeste shook her head once. "You already said it months ago." He lowered his gaze. For the first time, he felt the full weight of consequence without leverage to negotiate it. "Let me ask you something. If someone dismissed you for optics, then returned once the applause faded, would you take them back? Would you reopen a door they closed so confidently?" Comment below. Because Celeste had already made her decision. Her wedding was 3 weeks away. Invitations had been sent, and Rowan was not on the guest list. The wedding was intentionally small. No industry sponsors, no executive panels in attendance, no media alerts. It took place in a quiet coastal estate owned by one of Oliver's longtime mentors. White stone walls, open sky, a narrow aisle lined with simple ivory florals. Only close friends and family were present. No venture capital partners, no tech journalists, no strategic advantage to be gained. Celeste chose a gown that reflected who she had always been. Structured, elegant, refined, no attempt to appear youthful, no effort to compete with trends. She stood in a private room before the ceremony, looking at her reflection with calm clarity. There was no rush in her breathing, no last-minute doubt. She was not walking toward spectacle. She was walking toward alignment. Outside, guests spoke in low tones. Laughter carried gently through the open courtyard. The air felt grounded. Oliver waited at the end of the aisle in a tailored suit, posture steady. His hands rested loosely in front of him. When the music began, conversation softened. Celeste stepped forward. There were no flashing cameras to document her walk, just witnesses. Each step was deliberate, not dramatic, certain. The ceremony itself was brief. Vows centered on partnership, respect, shared vision. Oliver did not promise excitement. He promised consistency. Celeste did not promise admiration. She promised loyalty to discipline. When they exchanged rings, applause followed naturally, not thunderous, sincere. There were no exaggerated speeches afterward, just conversation, shared meals, warm embraces. The wedding did not announce dominance. It confirmed stability. And somewhere miles away, in a glass office overlooking the city, news of the ceremony reached Rowan Hale. When Celeste reached the end of the aisle, Oliver did not rush forward. He waited. That restraint was consistent with everything about him. As she stepped into place beside him, he looked at her with an expression that held no calculation, no assessment of optics, no awareness of who might be observing. Just recognition. There was no need to impress the room. He had already chosen her long before this day. During the vows, he did not reference competition. He did not mention industry battles or shared victories. "I choose partnership," he said steadily. "Not because it strengthens my image, because it strengthens my life." The words were simple, intentional. When Celeste spoke, her tone matched his. "I choose alignment," she said. "Not because it is visible, because it is durable." Oliver's gaze did not waver. He did not look at the guests. He did not scan the setting. He looked at her as if the ceremony were a confirmation, not a performance. Not a performance. Throughout the reception, he remained present. When conversations pulled him briefly into business discussions, he redirected them gently. "Today is not about markets," he said once with a quiet smile. He stood beside Celeste as an equal, not as a figure to be admired. There was no need to amplify her experience. He valued it openly. At one point during the evening, as music played softly and guests gathered near the terrace, Oliver leaned closer and said quietly, "You are not an accessory to my success." She met his eyes. "And you are not a distraction from mine," she replied. There was no applause for that exchange. No one else heard it. But in that quiet affirmation, the difference between performance and partnership became unmistakable. This was not momentum. This was foundation. Rowan was in the middle of a strategy briefing when his phone vibrated. He ignored it at first. The meeting focused on quarterly projections and investor retention metrics. Brielle was no longer seated at the table. The room felt different these days. Less animated. More analytical. The phone vibrated again. He glanced down briefly. A message from a board member. "It's official. Vance married Laurent today." He read it twice. For a moment, the numbers on the presentation screen blurred slightly. "Continue," he said to the CFO, keeping his tone steady. The meeting proceeded. He contributed where necessary, asked questions, challenged assumptions. No one in the room would have guessed that something had shifted internally. When the meeting concluded, he returned to his office and closed the door. He did not call anyone. He opened his laptop. Within minutes, photos began circulating through private industry groups. Not media blasts, just shared images from attendees. Celeste standing beside Oliver beneath open sky. Rings exchanged. Soft smiles. There was no spectacle in the images. No exaggerated celebration. Just certainty. Rowan leaned back slowly in his chair. He remembered the hotel suite. "You're too old for me now." The words returned uninvited. He had spoken them with composure. Now they echoed differently. He had framed that moment as strategic evolution. Today, it felt like miscalculation. He enlarged one of the photos. Celeste's expression was not triumphant. It was peaceful. That unsettled him more than visible victory would have. Because peace cannot be staged. And for the first time since their separation, Rowan felt something he had not fully allowed himself to process. Loss. Not of convenience, of depth. Rowan stood up from his desk and walked to the window, watching the city below him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the skyline, but inside his office, the light felt cold. He couldn't quite place it, whether it was the growing weight of the past few months or the sudden clarity that hit him in the quiet after hearing the news. It wasn't just that Celeste was married. It was that she had moved on without the dramatic closure he expected. Without hesitation. She had made a decision, not based on anger, not because of bitterness, but because of something deeper he had missed, something he hadn't truly understood until now. Peace. Rowan's eyes lingered on the wedding photo. He zoomed in, studying the way she held Oliver's gaze. No uncertainty, no looking away, like she had when they were together. She had found what he couldn't give her. And in that moment, Rowan felt something shift, something irreparable. He had spent the last few months convincing himself he could justify the way he'd discarded her. That his decisions, his strategic moves, were valid. But standing here now, watching her in that quiet moment of certainty with Oliver, he realized what he had lost. Not just a partner, not just a strategist. He had lost someone who believed in him enough to help him rebuild, even when his ego said he didn't need it. The familiar constant weight in his chest seemed heavier now. His phone vibrated again, breaking his reverie. A reminder about an upcoming interview. But it was clear to him now. Nothing about that interview, nothing about his next board meeting, would matter. He had watched the market move fast, but today he saw something different. Something he couldn't control. He couldn't fix this. And for the first time in his career, he didn't know how to pivot. Rowan closed the laptop with a quiet click. He sat back down at his desk. There was a ringing in his ears. The door to his office opened. Brielle stepped inside, her presence light, but Rowan barely acknowledged her. "Are you okay?" she asked, clearly noticing his demeanor. He didn't answer immediately. Then, without looking up, he muttered, "No, I'm not." And just as quickly, his phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. A simple, unspoken prompt. "Oliver Vance requests a meeting with you." 3 months passed after Celeste's wedding. The industry continued to move at its rapid pace, But inside the offices of both Vance Systems and Hale Technologies, the shifts were clear. Oliver Vance had not just managed his company's growth, he had controlled it. His steady hand guided Vance Systems through the aftermath of their acquisition, steering the company into new markets while maintaining the discipline of his vision. Growth was measured, but not hastily pursued. By the end of the quarter, Vance Systems reported its strongest revenue yet. Profits were up 25%. Their latest merger had outpaced even their most ambitious forecasts. It was a well-executed, patient climb to the top, with strategic acquisitions filling the gaps and ensuring long-term viability. Meanwhile, Rowan's company was struggling. Despite the press coverage and the continued buzz surrounding his leadership, the results told a different story. Hale Technologies was losing ground in key sectors. Quarterly losses widened, and despite his team's best efforts to turn things around, the pressure to grow faster and deliver flashier results weighed on Rowan's every decision. Vance Systems' discipline was proving more resilient than Hale's spectacle. The contrast was undeniable, and it didn't go unnoticed in the media. Industry analysts began referencing the two companies in comparative articles. Vance Systems outpaces Hale Technologies, despite smaller market reach. Oliver Vance's discipline versus Rowan Hale's vision. A study in sustainable growth. Investors began questioning the sustainability of Hale Technologies' fast-moving, image-driven approach, asking whether it could hold up in a market that demanded stability and sustainability over short-term buzz. Rowan's reputation for innovation was losing its luster. Meanwhile, Oliver's quiet but consistent strategy was being recognized for what it was: reliable, practical, built to last. And through all of it, Celeste stood beside Oliver, not as a figurehead but as a partner. Her guidance had shaped the quiet success, influencing every calculated decision with the same precision she had once brought to Rowan's company. In that moment, the weight of it all became clear to Rowan. What had he really built? Was it truly innovation he valued, or was it just a desire for recognition? And in contrast, what was Oliver building? The answer felt sharper: discipline over ego, stability over spectacle. Rowan had spent years chasing approval, from investors, from the public, from the industry. In the beginning, he had justified it. He had built Hale Technologies from the ground up, transforming it into a powerhouse. But as the years passed, the applause became more important than the foundation he had laid. He began chasing the next headline, the next tech summit, the next product launch. It wasn't just about success anymore. It was about being seen as a visionary, about staying relevant in an industry that shifted faster than anyone could predict. Oliver, on the other hand, never seemed to need the applause. Oliver's vision wasn't about loud declarations. It was about quiet control, knowing that sustainable success didn't require validation. He didn't need to be everywhere. He didn't need to be celebrated for every minor win. He simply needed to build something that mattered. And he did so with careful, deliberate steps. Where Rowan threw himself into high-profile ventures, Oliver chose the path of strategic consolidation. Where Rowan had invested in flashy brand partnerships and media exposure, Oliver made sure that his company's foundation was strong enough to weather whatever challenges came its way. He didn't need recognition, he needed results. The contrast between their approaches became increasingly obvious. Rowan's ambitious, outward-facing strategy relied heavily on visibility, leveraging his network and public presence to drive company growth. The result was quick momentum, but inconsistent returns. When the market shifted, as it always does, it left his company exposed, fragile in its reliance on optics. Oliver, by contrast, built discipline into the core of Vance Systems. He refused to let ego dictate decisions. He prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term accolades. It wasn't about being seen, it was about being right. And now, looking at the market data, Rowan couldn't ignore the consequences. Oliver's steady climb had turned into an undeniable lead. Vance Systems was now outperforming Hale Technologies in nearly every key metric. Rowan had built a company based on his ego, constantly fighting for the next headline, the next acknowledgement. Oliver had built a company based on his discipline, prioritizing integrity over applause, and the results spoke for themselves. Rowan sat at his desk, staring at the quarterly report from Vance Systems. The numbers were clear: no tricks, no flashy headlines, just a slow, calculated rise. Vance Systems had surpassed Hale Technologies in every meaningful way. Revenue, growth rate, market share. Oliver's company had outpaced him across the board. It wasn't just about money, it was about resilience, sustainability, and discipline. For the first time in a long while, Rowan didn't feel the rush of validation he had once sought after every acquisition, every partnership, every public appearance. Instead, he felt something else, a quiet, almost suffocating pressure. He ran his fingers through his hair, leaning back in his chair, staring out at the city. It should have been his success. He should have been the one leading the charge, the one getting the headlines, the one with the accolades. But as he sat there, something shifted within him. He had spent so long looking outward, crafting his image, shaping his narrative, and now he was forced to look inward. The decisions he made, the ones based on optics, on visibility, had caught up with him. Ego had driven him to where he was. He had assumed that the faster he moved, the more he'd be recognized. The louder he was, the more people would listen. But the truth was, he had neglected what really mattered. The core of his company, the stability beneath the surface. He had neglected what was necessary to build something sustainable, to grow something that wasn't reliant on the next headline or the next applause. His mind wandered back to Oliver, to the way he had quietly built his empire, not for the spectacle, but for the longevity of it. Oliver wasn't after validation. He wasn't after recognition. He had known, even when Rowan had been consumed by his own ambition, that building something truly worthwhile wasn't about being seen. It was about being steady. Rowan's thoughts turned to Celeste. She had always understood this. She had always understood the importance of depth, of choosing stability over the noise. She had given him everything, and he had let it slip away because he couldn't see past his own ego. Now, as the reality of his position set in, the clarity was undeniable. He had mistaken attention for success. And now, with the market shifting around him, he was left with the consequences of his own choices. The realization hit Rowan harder than any boardroom challenge he'd ever faced. Ego doesn't build lasting success. It only fuels temporary momentum. Celeste had always known this. She had been the one to warn him about chasing applause, to challenge him when he thought recognition would sustain him. She had made it clear that substance, not optics, was the foundation of real growth. But he had been too caught up in the noise to listen, and now he was left picking up the pieces. Rowan sat in his office, staring at the reports, the headlines, the reminders of how far he had fallen from his original vision. Vance Systems, with its quiet discipline, had not only surpassed him in numbers, but had become the model of what he should have been. It was painful, but there was clarity in the pain. Age isn't decline. Ego is. Celeste had not been the one to age out of relevance. It was his ego that had failed him, blinding him to what truly mattered: sustainable growth, integrity, long-term vision. The very things that had built Oliver's company and Celeste's career. The things that he had for so long dismissed as secondary to the rush of public recognition. And now, standing at this crossroads, Rowan had to ask himself, what was he going to do next? Could he rebuild? Could he find a way to operate without the noise? Without the constant chase for the next accolade? The real test was not in whether he could outperform others. It was in whether he could outperform his own ego. As you reflect on this story, let me ask you, if someone chooses image over loyalty, do you fight to prove yourself? Or do you walk and let your absence speak for itself? Comment below with your thoughts on dignity, self-worth, and choosing alignment over applause. Because in the end, true success is built not by how loudly we're seen, but by the strength of what's built quietly behind the scenes. The market may shift again, and success may look different next time. But one thing remains certain: ego can only take you so far. True depth? That compounds over time.